About the Ohio State and Michigan rivalry. Obviously, I'm sure, you're asked about this all the time, but because it is rivalry week here on the show, we're doing sports rivalries and non-sports rivalries too, which we'll get your thoughts on. But your favorite memory or biggest memory from those Ohio State-Michigan battles?
It's crazy. We went 3-1 in those games, and I grew up a product of the 90s where, Michigan was dominating against some very good Ohio State teams, and the teams that were probably national championship contenders or potentially winners should they have been able to win that game, and unfortunately they couldn't get it done. So it was kind of, I came in the era when it kind of all flipped, and so we won in 2002. It was something that was great. It's the first time they had won back-to-back games, and my goodness, 14, 15 years, lost in 2003, and it was one of my senior year in 2005 up there, so that winning up there was a big deal for me, but probably the one that kind of epitomizes the rivalry the most was in 2004. It was a team that I was a part of that ended up going 8-4, but coming into that game, we were 6-4, and we were out of the obviously the Big Ten playoff hunt. We'd lost 3 in a row earlier in the season, and Michigan was, I believe, 8-1, and basically 9-1, and had wrapped up the Big Ten already. They were going to the Rose Bowl. We were able to, we went down early in the game, I think 14-3, and battled back, and ended up winning that game by more than double digits. So. And that made our season. And so, I remember vividly being in there, like, going 8-4 with the Alamo Bowl. Michigan's going to the Rose Bowl, but I could sense, there was a fuller feeling in our locker room than there was in theirs, because winning that game, it wasn't just the cherry on the Sunday of the season. It basically made our season, help propel us to be able to have the success that we had the next year and ultimately in the coming years after. So that, to me, kind of, it just epitomizes everything that game is all about, that winning that game means more than just a game. It can really define your season as a player.
Bobby, you played in the NFL as well. Why is it that college rivalries, especially in football, just seem so much more intense, at least to me, than pro rivalries?
Well, you look at, professional football, and college has kind of changed a little bit with the transfer portal and how everything goes. But, in college, guys are, usually there 3, 4, 5 years. You get legacies, guys that have played there before. I played, one of my teammates there, his dad had played at Ohio State, especially at Michigan. It's a regional thing. You always kind of dream of usually going to the school in your state. And then also, there's the element of whether you had family members that played football there or not. My aunt went to Ohio State, or my grandpa went there, or, they went to Michigan, and, we're from Detroit, or maybe I'm from Toledo and I went to Michigan, all these things. And you remember growing up and going to the games and watching them and talking about them. And even though, like I said, you may not have played football, you still have that diploma maybe hanging on your wall. And so that ties you to that university in a way that professional sports can never tie you. You're a fan, you may be a season ticket holder, but it's not the same as, walking through campus, walking the halls, being a part of the marching band or playing another sport there, whatever it might be. Those are the things that separate collegiate athletics from the professional realm.
Bobby Carpenter is joining us. He's a former Ohio State linebacker. He's the host of Morning Juice on 97.1 The Fan in Columbus. Bobby, as someone who's on the outside of this rivalry, just enjoys it as a spectator, it seems kind of crazy to me to think that Ryan Day could be feeling any heat just because Ohio State has lost 2 in a row. You're obviously very much in this rivalry. What do you think?
Ryan gets it. He's talked about it publicly. He understands the pressure that's there. I know it's tough because he came right off of an unprecedented run of 20 years where, Michigan, I think, had won 2 or 3 games, going back since 2001 all the way until 2021. And he took over, they win a game, and you have COVID, you have all kinds of stuff. You lose one up there, you lose one down here. And, there's a good chance that, they're a 50-yard field goal make away from potentially winning the national championship last year. But all that pales in comparison, to being able to, beat that team up north, as they say. So there's a lot of pressure. People at Ohio State take a lot of pride in it, almost to the point where you'd rather, beat Michigan than win a national championship, which is a little crazy to think. But there's just so much pride, just especially with people going through the era of the 90s where you had some generational teams that just couldn't get it done, against Michigan. That was tough. So it's a very, very difficult situation for him, and he knows the pressure that's on him. The players understand it. And I don't think, it's a good thing is Coach Tressel, who coached me, he was at Ohio State for 10 years and went 9-1. He recently retired from Youngstown State. He was the guy that kind of flipped the rivalry. And I know that he's been in contact with Coach Day. I know that they've had conversations. And the one thing Tress was so good at is he was process-oriented. And everybody gets so focused in results, but the reality is in life, it's the process that gets you there. And I know that he's talked with Ryan about that, and I feel very good about where they're at heading into this season. They're playing a Michigan team that's going to be, top 5 for sure, probably top 2 or 3. And, that game's going to mean everything, the Saturday after Thanksgiving.
Bobby, is it a real quarterback battle with Kyle McCord and Devin Brown in Ohio State?
I tend to think Kyle has the advantage. Being around there, seeing him. I know Devin hurt his hand. Wasn't able to participate in the last week or so with spring ball, and that's tough. And anytime a guy coming in, someone's got a year up on him, that makes it a lot easier. You know the offense, you know the system, you're confident in everything that's going on. You were the backup the year before, you got in some games. And so I would say that I would give the edge to Kyle. If he goes out and plays poorly, and Devin plays well, it's going to be his job. But I have a tendency to believe, if you ask me where to put the smart money, I would put it on Kyle McCord right now.
Bobby Carpenter is joining us, former Ohio State linebacker, host of Morning Juice on 97.1 The Fan in Columbus. Last one for me for you, Bobby. It's a little bigger picture here. Obviously UCLA and USC are going to join the Big Ten next year. And the Big Ten has kind of said, I know the commissioners recently said, all right, we're going to sort of back off on adding schools for now. But how long do you think it is before the Big Ten starts adding more schools with considering the landscape here, and it feels like a bit of a land grab, even more so than before?
I had heard this, that, part of the USC-UCLA addition is they didn't want anyone else on the West Coast joining for recruiting reasons. Now, it seems kind of crazy because you think they'd want some people out there that didn't have to travel 2,000 miles to play. But if that's the case, I know Washington and Oregon are very appealing. We'll see Colorado join the Big 12. We'll see if Arizona and Arizona State potentially move. If they move, I can't imagine Utah not moving as well. With the way that the Big 12 TV contract set up, where every school from a Power 5 conference that comes in gets an additional share. And if that's the case, that you start looking around and there may be one more big additional round of reorganization. And if that's the case, you could see Florida State and Clemson moving. You could potentially see North Carolina come to the Big Ten. Maybe Notre Dame finally joins the conference. I don't think that it's something that they're looking at and being aggressive towards, but if something does happen and there is another big move, I can see the Big Ten trying to position itself right there, and maybe it's a North Carolina or a Notre Dame or an Oregon, whoever it might be. They're going to be very selective because they don't want to share any more of that revenue, but if they can add schools that make sense on a dollar value and care about athletics the way that the schools in the Big Ten do, then I can see that potentially happening.
One more big picture question for you, Bobby. Last year there was a column, I don't know if you ever saw this, from Sports Illustrated's Michael Rosenberg, saying that when college football goes to 12 teams, that will, in essence, kill the Michigan-Ohio State rivalry, because it won't mean as much because both teams will often know that they're going to the playoffs. Do you agree with that?
It's tough. And, Ryan Day was asked a question about, should they consider moving it, given the fact that they're going to go divisionless and you could play in the final week of the season. You could play that game in the Big Ten championship and then potentially play it again in the playoffs. And, playing 3 times over the course of, 6 weeks, that's kind of wild. And so the one thing that's great about college football, we just talked about those traditions, the rivalries, and, it breaks my heart, the fact that, you start looking at, Bedlam isn't going to happen anymore. And, should Oregon leave? You're not going to have, the Civil War anymore. Like some of these rivalries, you didn't have Texas and Texas A&M for the long time. Like games that I grew up watching, you haven't seen Oklahoma and Nebraska on a regular basis. And I hope that those never fully go away. And regardless of how you move them, where you put them, there's always going to be something special about that game for Ohio State and Michigan. It's got over 100 years of tradition. It's fantastic. And, people always want to know, what your record was at Ohio State. And that's not your overall record. It's what were you against Michigan. And, I take a lot of pride in saying I got 3 pairs of gold pants. You get a pair of charm every time you win. And so I don't think it'll ever be fully diminished, but it might take a couple chunks out of it, just based upon playing multiple times in a year and potentially if they choose to move it off that final week of the regular season.
Bobby, last one. So we're doing non-sports rivalries as well. Just quickly want to get your take. We're doing greatest TV show rivalries of all time. Perloff went with Letterman versus Leno. I went with Seinfeld versus Friends. Any of those speak to you?
Those are good. I mean, I was always a Leno guy. I liked Friends. I liked Seinfeld. Probably a little more Friends in my wheelhouse. I know you got music in there. I mean, you could maybe go Pearl Jam and Nirvana if you want to kind of go, some early 90s grunge in there. And it was crazy because I was always a big Nirvana fan. And my guy Tony Romo in Dallas, he made a strong argument to me at one point that Pearl Jam was better than Nirvana. And he goes, if it wasn't for Kurt Cobain's passing, they were already fading away. And no one wants to diminish that, but I started looking at it. I came around to the other side, and so I may be one of the few people that actually flip my position based upon a good argument now in this world. Where I actually probably flipped over to Pearl Jam and Eddie Vedder over Kurt Cobain and Nirvana.
Wow, it's so funny. We just did music yesterday. We're talking about, have you ever seen the video where Kurt Cobain and Eddie Vedder hugged backstage about a couple weeks before Kurt Cobain died? That they didn't like each other for most of their run, then finally figured it out?
And I have seen that. And that's how I'm a child of the 90s. I was huge in grunge. Grunge, I'd never mind. I had Neural. I've got all Pearl Jam's albums. Like back when you buy a whole CD and whole stinking thing, you could recognize it by the album art. But yeah, that was one of the iconic moments of like them connecting. You're glad that happens ultimately before, when someone passes, because that's just a terrible way to end things if you're ending on a bad note.